Good evening. It's hard to settle down on a beautiful spring afternoon like this. Thank you all for coming inside and joining us this evening for a conversation. Thank you always for being a part of everything that goes on here at Cameron Art Museum. Our members and our supporters are part of what makes this place so special in the community. So thank you all first for just being here tonight. So we are here to enjoy a conversation around our newest exhibition called Game Changers. We know that abstract expressionism is something that was a revolution here in the American art scene in the 20th century. And the three artists that we have on view were true mavericks at that time. And they happen to be the favorites of our guest curator, Ben Billingsley. So this was an absolute joy for him to curate this exhibition. And it's a perfect combination for him and his background as an artist, art historian, as someone who is a painter and printmaker who deeply understands the processes involved in the work. And he is here to unpack the story of Robert Rauschenberg, Richard Diebenkorn, and Helen Frankenthaler. Please help me welcome Ben Billingsley.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm so honored to see so many faces tonight. This is truly a dream come true for me. As September said, these are quite honestly some of my absolute favorite artists. When Heather Wilson, our executive director, first approached me about the show, she said, if you were going to build a show around prints from the Belden collection, what three names come to mind? And immediately I said, Diebenkorn, Frankenthaler, Rauchenberg. I think in that order. And suddenly we were thinking about making a show. It is really kind of an exciting thing to see. It is revolutionary. I think every one of these artists did something that was truly unique, that was incredibly important, and I think they're artists who don't get the credit that they so richly deserved. They were overshadowed by other people, and we'll talk about that as we go. But the thing that's really critical to me about the exhibition is the majority of the work is non-objective abstraction, which can turn some people off. I have always thought it was kind of an exciting thing, and I like to understand it a little bit better. So let me show you how we got to where we are today. This is not in the show. This is a bizarre conceptual artwork experiment from the mid-90s that was presented online. It is the work of a couple of immigrant artists from Russia who are now American citizens. And what they did was survey audiences at museums and ask them, what art do you like and what do you hate? And they did these pairs. So on the left is what America likes. On the right is what America hates. It's kind of funny. And they did this for all kinds of different countries, all different nationalities. But in America, can you tell what the things are that historically we like? Landscape, representational. There better be an animal in it somewhere. Vaguely some historical reference. You see George Washington just hanging out for no reason whatsoever? Then what do we hate? Art that doesn't fit our couch, right? So this is too small. It doesn't fit the couch. It's got texture. It has geometry. I know, right? Cringe. It's mainly unmodulated, bold colors. I don't understand it. I hate it. It's a fascinating game, I think, to consider what is it that we don't like about this and why, and is it part of our cultural background? It's also interesting to think about the stuff that a museum's job, partially, is to preserve and to promote. So the artwork that overshadowed our game changers is what's on the slide in front of you right now. You know Pollock. You knew him before you walked in the door. You might be less familiar with de Kooning, but certainly you've seen his work, you've seen Rothko. These are the artists, I think, that people associate with the 50s in America and when America took over the art world and yada yada. That's true. It's absolutely true. But it's not the only story, and it's not the only approach. So it's kind of intriguing to me. I have been teaching art history, obviously, for far too long. There's plenty of students in here who can tell you it's been way too long. And I get a little passionate about the fact that we don't really do anything but show you the highlights, the most famous people, right? So let's look at how we got to that. If you weren't doing abstract expressionism, by the 60s you were doing pop. And if your name wasn't Andy, nobody cared. We love it. I mean, I'm not saying any of these things are bad, but this is who was kind of dominating the field. And there are other artists who really need to be seen. This is total hubris. That is a drawing by me on the right from early days teaching at Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington. I made a drawing of our downtown campus from above, from our library building tower. I liked it. And then I started looking at Diebenkorn drawings and I realized, oh my goodness, there's angles and lines and shapes that I'm totally stealing without even knowing I'm stealing. These were really fundamental things for me as I was developing as an artist, was looking for other art that looked like the art I wanted to make. When I was in school, Diebenkorn was not in the book. A teacher told me about him and we had to look him up in magazines and stuff. This is, magazines come to your house, they pay for it. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have the internet. So finding the information was almost impossible in those days. And when I saw Diebenkorn's painting, the top of my head popped open and I thought, this is what I've been trying to do my whole career. Why didn't somebody tell me this existed? Why are the only things in the book this stupid splatter stuff that we already have seen 100,000 times? So, how did Diebenkorn get to be Diebenkorn? My favorite thing about him is that he does the opposite of what you expect him to do. When everybody else in the New York art scene is saying abstract expressionism is the key to life itself, he says, let's go figurative. When the pop movement starts and it's okay to do the figure again, he says, no, geometric abstraction. He's constantly doing the opposite of what the trend is telling him to do. I put these in on purpose. Look at the dates. His life versus how many years are spanned by this exhibition. We have 40 years worth of his work, technically. Representative samples across that period. And the world, our culture, changed a lot in that time. This is one of my personal favorites of his. It's not in the show, but it gives you a sense of what he was doing when Jackson Pollock was dripping and when we were seeing big naked ladies by de Kooning. This is still an abstract expressionist language. This is still very loose and action painted, but it also has a subject. And that subject is not some big mythological thing. That subject is something you can grab onto and understand for yourself. I need my pot or cup of coffee in the morning. It's really the whole pot, but I need it. And that moment of getting able to kind of set my day up is a kind of important ritual in my house. That painting has always kind of resonated with me because it's a nothing moment that all of us actually share. And I think that there's something profound about that. We also know that Diebenkorn was very involved in printmaking throughout his career. So I've keyed in a couple of the techniques that are on view. We're also thinking about how artists are encountering these techniques. A lot of print techniques, particularly lithography, was not being taught in the major university systems when these artists were coming up. You were able to learn it from ateliers, from printing presses that were independently owned and operated. So you'll see on some of the prints in there, the blind stamp, or what ceramicists might call the chop mark. It's the publisher's mark that goes on the work that tells you which group produced the piece. My best printmaking professor, John Maggio, worked at Tamarind Institute as a lithographer, and his main job was to make other artists' visions come true. So an artist who was known as a painter and didn't know anything about litho would show up be paired up with him. They would discuss what the project was. He'd help them realize their design. So it's a very collaborative kind of process that is being led in this generation by artists who don't know that you can't do that with a lithostone. They've never been trained in it, right? So they're trying to do things that the materials themselves sometimes don't even want to do. And the master printmakers are figuring out how to make it happen. These are silly, you'll get used to seeing them. But before each piece in the show, I put together a little pop culture window for you. The first piece in the exhibition chronologically is from 1951, when Nat King Cole was at the top of the charts. Kids are like, Nat King what? The last piece has Lady Gaga on it, I promise. I was born that way too. So these are the images that were in kind of popular culture, right? This is sort of the world that is happening when Diebenkorn is making his work. Think I Love Lucy, right? Think Christian Dior, gorgeous clothes, and then that. Wouldn't that kind of stand out to you as something outrageous, unbelievable, unusual? And these are happening, believe it or not in New York City. This is happening in his MFA program in friggin' Albuquerque. Is that crazy? It is really kind of an amazing thing to think about the fact that this kind of language is coming out of an artist who's not in the center, who's not in the right coast, who's not in the right schools, who's making work that kicks the hiney out of some of the people who were getting a lot of attention at that moment. How about this? We'll jump a little ahead to 1960. Theme from the Summer Plays? That was the top song that year. Is that hard to imagine? Ben-Hur is the Oscar-winning film. Spartacus was the top of the box office, didn't win the Oscar, but this gives you a sense of what kind of spectacle was in pop culture. And Diebenkorn changes course again. He's now doing, right? Yes, that gesture is absolutely right. This painting is probably my favorite piece in the exhibition that the camera doesn't own. It is emotional, it's evocative, it feels fresh, it feels like he just walked away from the easel. It has all of that immediacy that you expect out of abstract expressionists, but it also has a subject that you can actually relate to. There's something really deeply profound about that. This piece has been shown, I included this information just so you could get a sense of how frequently this has been exhibited around the country and how many publications it's been reproduced in. So it took some time for him to really hit, but you'll notice that his work is much more in the public domain now than it used to be. All right, 1963, Surfin' USA. Look at the wet look. Does that not look like your imagination of what the 60s kind of mod look is supposed to be? It's beginning to happen, things are beginning to change. The president looks different, younger, right? Things are beginning to be a little different. Diebenkorn is still following this path of making work that is right on the edge of being totally abstract, and yet, can you see the street? Clear as day. But it's triangles and diagonal lines and large shapes and negative spaces. There's no people in it. The shadow is as exciting as any other shape in there. It's about the only organic form that you've got. This is the piece that is on loan to us from Art Bridges. It was in another exhibition, so it will be here in like a week and a half. So come back and you'll see it in person. It's gorgeous. This is absolutely one of my favorite paintings in the entire world because it hovers right on the edge between being a pure abstraction and a really detailed, realistic, representational image. 1967, we've got LBJ in the White House. The Beatles only managed to make it to number 30 on the Hot 100 with All You Need Is Love. That's hard to imagine. That actually kind of surprised me. I assumed that would have charted a lot higher. The top song that year was Lulu, To Serve With Love. Some of you remember this. This is what Diebenkorn is doing. Instead of To Serve With Love, it's To Women With Love. He was an avid figure drawer his entire career. When your teachers are harping at you, and I'm looking at specific students right now, when your teachers are harping at you about needing to be able to draw, we're not just saying fill up our class and make sure we get paid. Drawing and design are fundamental skills that you need to have, whether you're a photographer, a sculptor, or painter. And what he's doing in this piece that is so, to me, related to all of the other work in the show is it's black and white lines, black, white, and gray values, arranged around a geometric structure with a handful of carefully placed organic lines to suggest the human body. If you look at them with this piece in mind, the later works are also built on the same structure. A lot of times my students think when I give an assignment, I don't think I've done this specifically to any of you. Max, I didn't do this to you, did I? To make you have to draw an abstraction. The kids freak out. I'm talking to the grown-ups now, just let us be. The kids kind of freak out because they don't understand what to do immediately. If I give the assignment, do a still life, no problem. I'll put a still life on. Oh, no more fruit. But you know what to do with it, right? You can see it, it tells you what to do. But when it's this, when it starts to get more abstract, it's hard to figure out what to do. You have to start from something. Abstraction is a term that means to abstract from, to change from, to alter from. There's an impulse, an idea, an emotion, a vision, something that sparks your imagination. You can see, even in our fashion, our imaginations are starting to get sparked. It's kind of crazy, but Saint Laurent is now actually doing boutique haute couture clothing for men. That's a new thing in this generation, and this artwork is new. Diebenkorn has now, in the hot, heat of pop art, right, when everyone else is painting soup cans, he says, no, I'm gonna pare back down and take all that representation and lean heavily into the ideas of abstraction. This piece goes perfectly with the landscape. It goes perfectly with all of the other prints. It has very similar structural rules. Do you notice how much he gets away with empty space? How innovative. How many artists loved doing that in the 1880s and 90s when European artists discovered Japanese prints? And suddenly there were big negative spaces in images? Degas, anybody? His name comes up more than once. We're in the 80s. Things get really weird here. Kids, get ready for a little bit of a wild ride. Look at the fashion. Lord, it hasn't even gotten weird yet, and that's 1981. Dolly Parton is singing 9 to 5. Kim Carnes has a Betty Davis eyes, for those of you who remember that. And, Harrison Ford was a young action star before he was like the king of movies. We didn't know if it was gonna be good. We were like, Han Solo in a weird action movie? Okay, we'll try it. That is the same era, the same year that Diebenkorn starts playing backwards into his youth. He was obsessed as a child with heraldic symbols. He used a lot of these in drawings that he made as a kid, shapes that looked like they came from the insignia or the coat of arms of knights, medieval knights. But he was also very frequently using shapes from published things like playing cards. Can you see sort of a spade shape? It's abstracted into his own language, but it's there. This is in some weird ways, one of his most personal pieces. And he's doing it at a time that the culture itself is starting to loosen up a little bit about what our culture is interested in seeing. It's kind of a crazy time because we've got this kind of Perry Ellis fashion slap up against let's get physical. We were getting really mixed messages, I think, as a culture in this moment. How do you respond when the best picture is about political resistance And the top box office is about let's be friends with aliens. We were all kind of in an odd, I think, mental space there, and he pares down again. This piece is pretty intriguing. This one is called Mask. It is more complex than it appears. It's actually an aquatint, and a handful of people in here have tried to make aquatints, and it's not easy. Aquatint is an etching technique which involves multiple etches to achieve different thickness of line and different value of mark. The image is pared down to its absolute bare necessities, and it is, in some respects, I think, one of his pieces that shows you a different way of going about abstraction than anyone else was doing at that moment. 83 was a pretty big year for all of us. Thriller changed the landscape for sure, but let's not forget Annie in the Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams, Culture Club, the Ewoks. Our culture was getting really, really interesting and unique and different from things that we'd seen in the past. And Diebenkorn goes to Japan. This is the best piece in the show. I'm gonna say that a lot. But for right now, this is the best piece in the show. This is one that the Cameron owns. It is from the Louis Belden collection. Louis Belden was a friend of this museum. He was a trustee. He primarily as an adult lived and worked in San Francisco in the finance field, but he kept his ties to his childhood vacation home. And he definitely kept his eye on contemporary art, mid-century modern prints. It's what he collected, and he built his entire collection around that. A lot of work went into asking him to perhaps loan a few of them for us to show. And that eventually led to him deciding, this museum loves my collection and will take good care of it. This piece is now part of our collective experience as museum patrons. It is a world-class piece of art that includes some of the most incredible technical work you can possibly imagine. This was made when Diebenkorn was working with Crown Point Press, one of the independent presses we were talking about earlier. They had a visionary idea. Let's send Western artists to learn Japanese print technique. So he studied under a master Japanese printmaker, and they worked together to achieve this vision, which is done in essentially the same kind of technique as the ukiyo-e style floating world prints. They have very soft gradations of color. Does it look painted? It's a woodcut. Whoa, right? Like, it's kind of mind-boggling. If you've made a woodcut, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that. This piece is done in the Japanese style, where they ink not with a roller or brayer, as we say, but with brushes. So you can control the saturation of the color. It is applied meticulously to the woodblock, multiple blocks usually, and multiple layers of transparent color. Usually water-based inks as opposed to American oil-based inks. It's a completely different feeling. But this piece is a companion in so many ways, conceptually, visually, color scheme, to the landscape that we saw earlier from 1963. It's a brilliant piece of work. I included some information here just for those who are intrigued by this process. Tadashi Toda is the artist with whom Diebenkorn worked. They used Mitsumata paper, which is in Japanese referred to as a very feminine form. It's kind of an interesting idea. It's soft, it's velvety, it's like vellum. It's a beautiful paper to work with. And this is now getting us close to the end of Diebenkorn's life. He's exploring new territory as an older person. Good God, is that important, right? You can't let your mind just stop growing. What he's doing, this is just a screen grab of a contemporary artist doing Japanese style, just so you get an idea of the tools. It doesn't look like the American studio setup at all. We're doing woodcut at Cape Fear right now. Where's the brayers, right? Where's the big chisels? It's all brush and water-based inks. It's kind of a fascinating thing. This, I think, was a real cultural changing moment. Notice that the slides for the pop culture bit have started to have more female faces. The skin tones are a little darker. We're starting to see more diversity, I think, on the popular cultural sphere. And that's a really important aspect, I think, of what's going on there. Let's not forget, I mean, before the scandal, this was a massive juggernaut of a television show. America had never seen a Black family like this ever before. And during this era, Diebenkorn is making some of his most pared down and challenging images. This one is called Trip to the Ground. It was published in 1986, but he developed the plate in 1984. It was published out of LA by Gemini GEL is the publisher. It's an absolutely beautiful example. I wanted Mask to pair with this from our permanent collection, so you can kind of see him pulling on these same threads throughout his career. Some of you will remember that, even if you weren't here to see it. We used to go to the dance club, and CNC Music Factory made us sweat. You know the Beauty and the Beast. What a weird cultural moment that, like, a Best Picture contender's a cartoon. That's kind of crazy. That gay pop music, dance club music can chart is crazy. Diebenkorn is making some of his most rebellious work. This is maybe one of his most signature pieces, and again, it's in our collection. Other museums around the world own versions of this print. The great thing about prints is that they're multiples. There can be many copies, right? Signed and numbered as limited edition. We literally, you are sitting in a museum that owns some works that are also owned by really big name museums. You've heard of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. We have some of the same Diebenkorn prints that they do. It is an incredible thing to think about. We're a kind of small town in a way, but we have a huge cultural footprint. This piece is really kind of a fascinating one because it involves massive combinations of techniques you wouldn't expect. Soft ground etching. Kind of hard to explain, but etching can either be done by putting a ground onto your copper plate that's very hard, and you scratch through it like a scratch board, and you get very fine, crisp lines. But if you use a soft ground, you can get soft, pencil-like lines. It doesn't look like it came off a printing press. It looks like he drew it and painted it by hand because of the use of those techniques. Aquatint, again, is in play with this piece. So there's multiple etches to evolve all of those different values. He's also using spitbite. What? Spitbite. Literally, in the olden times, we used to mix human saliva with the acid because it would make it stickier and it would stay in place. But it's a way of allowing you to put a really dark etch in one place and a really light etch in another and absolutely control it like you would a painting in terms of value. The reason it doesn't look like a print, the reason it reads as a painting, is because it's done in a really painterly way. This is one of my favorite Diebenkorn stories of all time. He was in the military. He actually got the GI Bill to pay for his education as an artist. When he was first in the military, he was stationed near Washington, D.C., and he went to all the museums. He went to the Phillips collection and saw the painting on the left by Henri Matisse. And he was like, that's it. That's art. That's what I want to do. And today, the Phillips collection owns both of these pieces. The one he saw as a kid, like hopeful, and then his masterwork. Sit with that for a second, you 20-somethings, because seriously, it ain't over. You can do a lot with your career if you lean in. How about this? Those are Matisse paintings. Very abstract, very heavily influenced by his rivalry with Picasso, sure. But do you think there's a language in common with these two artists? That made me realize that art was about a conversation, that we are reacting constantly to one another and interacting in new ways and learning from each other. Matisse gets a bad rap for his work being too simple. This piece is often called Large Pink Nude, don't Google it. Took a second. These are photographs that he took as the piece developed over time. He photographed it at the end of each major working session. Look how much it changes. We'll zoom in on a couple key pieces. Abstraction isn't easy. I think sometimes people think that artists just like get high or drunk or I don't know what, and go into the studio and just mess around, and something happens. You can't work that way. It doesn't work that way. This is really meticulous work to get to that looks like it took him 5 seconds. It took months to get the right lines in the right place. In the olden times, I could only ever see his stuff in books before the internet. I remember seeing black and white reproductions of drawings that I thought were genius, and I wanted to see them. They were that big, little black and white photos, probably photocopied. When I finally got to go to Paris and I got to see them in person, I almost hit the floor when I realized how many erased lines you couldn't see in the photograph. These perfect, effortless lines have hundreds of trials underneath them, and that's exactly the way Helen Frankenthaler worked. Diebenkorn's friends and colleagues painted in a similar abstract expressionist way. This piece is from 2004 by Nathan Oliveira, one of the greatest artists of that generation. They kept pushing this boundary all the way up into your own lifetimes. These are the ones you've never even heard of. Wow, right? Now, we've all memorized Mark Rothko, and we've memorized Jackson Pollock, and we maybe know his wife, Lee Krasner, but nobody knows Manuel Neri. They're great artists in this entire generation, but they're on the wrong coast. They're in California. They're not part of the art scene here. So, someone who was, Frankenthaler, raised in New York, studied in New York, friends with Jackson Pollock, sort of. Those were artists who you would think would have those connections, would have set her up to be hugely successful, and she was. She won major prizes, she sold work to major museums, but her name is not top of mind for most of us. Largely, I think, because her work was undervalued because she was the second generation of abstract expressionists and a woman. Many of the women in that movement hid their identities by signing their work with men's names to get into exhibitions. Grace Hardigan is an example. Frankenthaler did not. She forthrightly used her own name. She was overshadowed by a couple of love relationships. And this is a little bit of the Wayback Machine, but there's a great early feminist book about women in the arts that is written by Germaine Greer, and it's called The Obstacle Race, the things that got in your way that made it so you couldn't be an artist. And love was a big one. Because if you're a female artist, you're gonna be a mom and you're gonna be running a household, and how are you gonna have time to do this? There are multiple examples I can give you of female artists from the past who didn't get the kind of attention that their male counterparts did. This, just as one example that you maybe don't know, is Camille Claudel, who was the lover of Rodin. When he dumped her, she ended up being sent by her family to a mental institution where she spent the next 30 years of her life and died because she was too emotional, right? How about that? We know her. Unibrow? Anybody? Frida, right? Frida was hugely overshadowed by her husband in their lifetime. Nobody knows his name. None of the young people know his name. Right, we do. Diego Rivera is a massively important name, but not as commonly known in pop culture for us today as Frida. Check out why. This is when Frida was in New York, painting here because her husband was doing big murals. He was working in Radio City Music Hall, and she dabbled. That's the kind of press that women were getting in the 50s. It seems hugely offensive today, of course. It is offensive. It would have been offensive then, but it's what these people faced. You think artists have reacted to that? The Guerrilla Girls sure did. They do statistical analyses of how many women artists are represented in museums. And did you know that the Cameron Art Museum currently has a higher percentage of female artists and artists of color than the national average? Advantages of being a woman artist: working without the pressure of success. I mean, it's funny, but it's a bitter pill to have to swallow. Not having to be in shows with men. My personal favorite, not being stuck in a tenured teaching position. Lucky me, right? This is the world, I think, that Frankenthaler was trying to bust through. And the thing that is truly fascinating, these are pieces I really, really wanted and we could not get the loan for. But these are examples of Frankenthaler early works, 1951 on the left, 57 on the right. Those are straight up representational drawings with watercolor and other materials that are absolutely landscapes. We know that in her youth, at about the age of 15, she made a life-sized self-portrait of somebody in their household staff. They had none, right? But she was initially kind of pursuing this idea of realism and quite quickly abandoned that. She is also a huge, important name in printmaking in America. Some of the things that she did involved massive combinations of techniques that really shouldn't belong together. This one, though, in particular, is what we call a jigsaw cut woodcut. The idea is that the block is cut into pieces like a puzzle so that colors can be inked and then reassembled so it can be printed simultaneously. The Japanese tradition would be one color at a time. Would take a lot longer. She also invented her own technique, which I love the name of, guzzying. It's her word. Guzzying was a technique for roughing up the surface of the wood to give it different textures. She would attack it with like steel wool, different grits of sandpaper, like little dental picks, to create all these odd effects, and then really show us the wood grain in the work. You can see that in a lot of what she's doing. The first piece we have of hers is from 1965, so The Sound of Music and the Mondrian dress are like taking over our popular culture. And she's doing this. It's bold colored, it's flat shapes, it is somewhat simple, it's very 60s in a way, but it is absolutely meant to mimic brushstrokes. And that, my friends, is a screen print. You don't necessarily think of screen printing being able to do this, but you need a separate screen for each color, and there's plenty of different materials you can use to make the stencils. There are drawing fluids that will allow you to literally kind of paint and draw freehand, and then apply an emulsion and spray it out, and you now have a stencil in the shape of your brushstroke. That's kind of genius, and you can see her knocking on that door right here. By the time we get to the 70s, things are getting even weirder. I do not have a memory of Marcus Welby, MD, but that was the top TV show, right? And who is this? That's Diana Ross. And this is what's happening in the world of Helen Frankenthaler. That piece looks like a painting, and it looks pretty simple. It's a print, and it's done in a stencil technique that is not silkscreen, it's pochoir. Try saying that. Pochoir is a technique that was developed largely in France for the industry that did illustrations for fashion. And that's how they did it. They're like, either, nowadays we use plastic, but you could use almost any stiff material, cut a design through it with a knife, and paint through it with a brush. It allows you to make something that looks like a painting that is reproducible. Each of those ones looks pretty much the same in that edition. She's found a way to make printmaking look like a painting. Other people were interested in that idea. That's Picasso. Can you tell what's the original painting? Yeah. Bobby's on top. This is absolutely the original painting. That's the signed print. He is using his own work as a template. And that's also a lesson that Frankenthaler gets from him. She continually redesigns her own work. A lot of what we have from her is from the 70s. a tumultuous period, to say the least. But the color schemes make more sense, I think, if you place them in their time, right? If you really pay attention to the dates here, you can kind of see this. This piece is really one of those fantastic examples of her free hand gesture. She wrote a lot about the fact that the drawing part was really important to her, and that the shapes, the lines, the forms were already in her wrist. She just had to let them go. That's kind of fascinating. She also wrote extensively about the fact that she threw away more art than she produced. If it wasn't the right effortless gesture, she threw it away and started again, and again, and again, and again. Barbara, 74, and we're already getting a little darker. This is a great piece in the exhibition that is an etching. Essentially, it's an aquatint with a few other techniques thrown in for good measure, that is an homage from Frankenthaler to Degas. And she does this frequently throughout her career, is make work that references the past, but in a new way. The kids know what I'm talking about because you guys are dressed in like 60s tie-dye with 90s jeans and an 80s headband, and your hair's pink, right? Like, those things don't go together, right? But you guys are the generation that puts together things that are unusual, right? Things from the past and re-envision them. That's what she's doing here. She's literally re-envisioning Degas. Those are prints that Mary Cassatt had him make. She forced him to try to learn print techniques. So he made images of her in aquatint, which is the technique that she's using right there. That's almost a love letter to Cassatt, disguised as a love letter to Degas. We have a bunch of her prints, obviously, in the collection, but this was her vision, that we were going to get the Impressionist artist more famous, more success by selling prints. And they just did not take her up on that idea. They should have done. This is one of her paintings that's an homage to Manet. At first, it just looks like a smear until you see the source it's referenced from, and you suddenly realize her goal is to deconstruct images into their component visual parts for just the pure pleasure of color itself. 77, Annie Hall and Star Wars and Laverne and Shirley. I'm trying to make that make sense. She is now so adept at this idea of re-envisioning herself that she's taking reference from her own works. That's a painting at the bottom that she's re-envisioning into the Dreamwalk print. It looks like one of the stain paintings. It was her signature technique. It's as important as Pollock's invention of dripping, for sure, but did not get the kind of attention it deserved. 78, the year of Greason, first ever fashion designer brand jeans. Calvin Klein emerges at that moment. And she's suddenly printing on pink paper. It's loud and obnoxious. It was hard to hang because there's not a lot of pink in the rest of the show to try to make it fit in logically. It's a really amazing piece that is made from lithographic stone. Litho is traditionally done on limestone. You draw with a grease-based material and then etch into it. It allows you to apply ink wherever the grease was. Basically, it works on the principle of oil and water don't mix. You can also etch in litho on aluminum. So this involves not only stone, but multiple aluminum plates. She's having to do a huge amount of planning to make something that looks so effortless. And I think there's something really profound in that. 1987, there's Whitney. Sweet. And this is what Frankenthaler is up to. This is Tiger's Eye, which again is combining tons of different techniques. Aquatint, which usually involves applying a rosin resist and then etching multiple times to achieve different values. Lift ground. A sugar lift is applying sugar with the ground that you're putting on that then dissolves in water, so it creates unique textures. It's a litho that also has screen printing on it. These are things that most of us in the print world wouldn't do, right? I will make a lithograph from start to finish, that's the technique. She is breaking every conceivable boundary. So did they. So did he. 1995, she's still at it. The world is changing around her, and she's developed her own language for interpreting that world. Pollock is dead 40 years back by this point. She continued to make of her language something vital that spoke to the art world for decades. The last piece of hers that we have is dated 2009, and there she is, Mother Monster. Isn't it crazy to think that these artists touched as far back as Nat King Cole all the way up to essentially today? That's the painting. This is the print from our permanent collection, which is done with over 90 individual separate silkscreen screens to achieve all of that variation in color, all of that variation in line work and brush work. She almost completely reproduced exactly her original work. It's an incredible accomplishment. She was known for her stain painting, so I wanted you to see one of the paintings just so you get an idea of what she's doing. She also worked on the floor. She poured her paint instead of dripping it like Pollock. And then her boyfriend at the time, Clement Greenberg, introduced a bunch of boy painters to her and said, hey, look at this stain thing. That's a pretty clever idea. And then when I was in school, the boys were in the book. And there's little asterisks. Helen Frankenthaler brought this up. She should be on the tip of your tongue just like Jackson Pollock because she innovated in a way that none of the other people of her generation did. That's acrylic paint. It's better for liquefying and staining than oil paint. Oil paint tends to yellow with time. It affects the ground that you put it on, the substrate, the canvas itself. That is gorgeous. I think you can see that there's still a landscape aspect to what she's doing, but it's almost like she's painting her interior landscape, the landscape of the mind. This is what her husband was doing after she and Greenberg broke up. She got together with Robert Motherwell. He overshadowed her. I like her stuff better. That's one of his prints from our permanent collection. I like her stuff better. These are the boys that were in my art history book. Doesn't it look dull? Can you see the oil seeping into the can? Like, they really kind of ripped her off and didn't do it quite as well. It's just a little sad. Now this one hurts a bit because this is a North Carolina homegrown artist. This is Kenneth Noland from Asheville. But do you remember, some of you have been members of the museum long enough to remember when we had that up on the wall in what is the film room now, right? This piece is something like 14 or 15 feet long. It's just straight lines. It's just straight lines. But these were people who got the massive amount of attention and got into the magazines, the history books. This is a Nolan piece that's in our permanent collection. It's beautiful, actually. But it's interesting to look at the work of these mavericks beside the work of people who were better known. That brings us to Robert Rauschenberg. Everybody kind of knows Rauschenberg. What makes him a game changer? Why is he different? I was talking about this exhibition with a recent graduate from UNCW, and I said, well, one of the things that held him back was Rauschenberg was gay. What? That's still not being talked about in class right now. In, what is it, 2025? Okay, I don't quite understand that. But it's a massive, important aspect of who he was and what he did. The other thing about Rauschenberg that you need to know is that he's not neuronormative. Let that sink into the 20-somethings. He had really severe dyslexia, which caused him to see things in reverse order and out of sequence and in weird layering, which is exactly what his art looks like. He is showing you the inside of his mind. It's a little odd, but it's gorgeous. He was pushing boundaries from the jump. That drawing is kind of what made him famous. It's called erased de Kooning. He asked Willem de Kooning for a drawing that he could take out of art history. That was his goal. And he spent a month like erasing it until it was just back to the paper, and then framed it. How rebellious is that? Making a print from a cartoon? That's just epic. Like, what a mind. This guy is trying to really push boundaries and do things that you wouldn't expect. He went to Black Mountain College. Frankenthaler was at Black Mountain for one summer. She did not have a good time. She did not like the accommodations. He was okay. He stayed longer and was pretty happy. During his time at Black Mountain, Rauschenberg becomes involved with a really interesting mix of new contemporary voices like John Cage and Merce Cunningham. This is the new music and the new dance. This is the heart of what goes on in our national ballet, right? And he's trying to fuse painting and sculpture and dance and movement and songs all into one thing. For Rauschenberg, art is a whole holistic experience. He's also smart as all get out. Now this looks stupid, right? I know, boring. Wish he'd shut up. I do too. That is a pair of paintings that he made trying to prove that you actually can copy an abstract expressionist painting. He made a painting in abstract expressionist style and then made a duplicate. Ooh, right? That's like gauntlet thrown down to everybody who says that only a genius can make these practiced moments. He is definitely a very avid printmaker, and specifically with lithography and screen printing and anything to do with being able to use a photographic source. So a lot of his work involves treating materials so that they're sensitive to light and transfer of images. He was a voracious collector of visual images. He took pictures of everything, and for a dyslexic artist, had a pretty good organizational system in his studio. He had books filled with the photographs. They were all clearly labeled and numbered. He could get on the phone and call his studio assistant on the ground floor and say, send me silkscreen number 65A. And they would go to the archive and get it and send it up. He could reuse any image from anything he had made earlier in his career. So he's constantly referencing himself and the world around him. The first work we have from him is from the 1960s, 1968. The Beatles are the Beatles now. The Stones are the Stones. They're not wearing suits anymore. They're saying really revolutionary things. And that's the art that he's making as kind of a response to the world around him. Can you see him referencing something from the past? Who's that? Turn sideways, that's the Mona Lisa's eye. Whoa! Right? Wow, okay. So he's somebody that you have to spend time with. It looks crazy. I know it looks crazy. But it has meaning, it has depth, it has impact. How about this? Oh my God, we got this. It's his autobiography. 1968, he's still a pretty young artist at this moment, and he's already done his life story. That is a full body X-ray scan of the artist. So he's literally in it. That is his entire life up to that moment, told in a fingerprint swirl of text. You can find Black Mountain, you can find who he was dating, you can find all of that relationship information as you spiral around. There's him doing his first ever performance art piece called Pelican, which is hilarious to me, right? But he did a lot of things on roller skates. The boy was breaking every boundary you possibly could. By the 70s, he is in your face in a way that is so subtle, you don't notice it instantly. When we talk about making art, a lot of times in the classroom, I say over and over to students, you need to make something that matters to you. Your art needs to come out of your experience. It needs to come out of your time on this planet. So look in the image and see if you can start picking out things that are quite obviously headline information from the year the piece was made. He is directly referencing anti-war marches and the GE General Electric strikes that were big news in that moment, but in an abstract way that looks like a black and white, crosshatchy kind of funky design. What he's talking about is Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. King, leading a march on the White House to protest the war. That really happened, and he's talking about it in the work. That moratorium march, the second one, was even bigger. Does that look astonishing to see how many people are physically there? And his work is talking about the world that he's living in. He does the same thing in this piece, which is a little more subtle, but do you see this? It's about busing. Right next to the fate of the Chicago 7. The Chicago 7, at one time the Chicago 8, were anti-war protesters who were beaten, arrested, and sentenced, and then eventually acquitted. That's what the work is about. So at first glance, it looks like a big black abstract thing. Okay, thanks, Mr. B, that's fun. But it's about the world changing. And to me, that's what the Game Changers is all about, changing the world around us. Rauschenberg in '74 starts doing this incredible stuff with lithography, with light. You can use, it takes chemicals, but you can treat the stones or the aluminum plates so that they're sensitive to light. And so if you put photographic negatives on them, you can actually make images that look exactly like reality. He's also then able to make you think you're looking at cloth when you're looking at ink. You can tell the type of weave. We had this conversation a couple weeks ago. But when you see that piece, it is entirely made from ink. But it looks like it's one of his collages of real objects. 77, Star Wars, hello. He's all about space. Can you see it? The moonshot, right? But also slapped together with things that are just from the planet whatever. The horse head? I don't know. Maybe the Godfather was on his arm. This one is subtitled Christmas, so go figure that out. But we know he was invited to NASA to see launches, right? He was really, really interested in the Apollo 11 project in particular. And you can see that reference coming up again and again in the work. 1979, the Village People were singing. And this is what he's doing. He's finally come full circle. His earliest works he called combines. They combined physical three-dimensional things with painted elements. They were sort of sculptures and sort of paintings. They were in between. They were combines. Now he's doing the same thing with prints. Not only are there images in there that come from photographs, there's collaged in physical, actual, real fabric in that one. That piece really kind of ties a nice bow around his career about the early work and the work he was doing later in his career. This one actually comes from my alma mater. We got this on loan from the Weatherspoon in Greensboro. I want them to come see it, to celebrate it with us. 1984, he's still at it with these incredible, very personal visions of what the world is to him. He said around this time, which I think is fascinating, he said that he was afraid as an artist that he was going to run out of world. Because he wanted to put everything, right? To him, art was everything in your life. The chair, the floor, the clicker, whatever. Every single thing was fodder for him to put into the work, and he was afraid that he wouldn't get to all of it. 95. These pieces are mind-boggling. They're huge. They don't look as big here as they are. Go see them. They are so beautiful. They look almost like watercolor paintings. He's experimenting at this point with digital art. Quite frankly, those are digital printed photographs, printed with vegetable dye, that is then loosened with gelatin and hand-burnished onto the substrate to make the print. It is sort of like what jelly printing wants to be, I guess, in a much more refined way. Those pieces are absolutely massive, and they're delicate, and they're soft. We purposefully put them near the anti-war pieces so that you have a contrast of really dark, heavy, and light, and airy, and beautiful. Those things are meant to speak, because your life is not just one thing. It's not just the one tragedy that happened to you. It's everything, the good and the bad, And I think Rauschenberg saw that more than any of us. 2004, Usher suddenly controls every part of the pop universe. And this is what he's contributing. These are prints that were made as part of an action to get people involved in politics. Clinton did the get out the vote, right? This is the same kind of idea. So this is ACT, America Comes Together Act. I love that idea. And the image itself is not really super political, but it was sold to raise funds to help fund the presidential election cycle. You can see the work relates to something in the real world, right? Every one of us, I think, has a responsibility to think about how our art relates to the world around us. That's Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns on the right. Jasper Johns was early on one of Rauschenberg's longer relationships. That's not in your art history book most of the time. And it should be, because they're cutie patooties and they deserve to be able to smooch. These guys were doing something that no one really had done before. They were taking the common everyday world and putting it into a new context. And in some cases, they were cribbing each other's notes. This is a piece that Rauschenberg made because he was invited to be in a show that his boyfriend, Jasper Johns, got rejected out of. So what did he do? He hid a Jasper Johns inside of it. Is that genius? The flag, right? So he's like, okay, take that, art world. We're gonna change you whether you want to be changed or not. He was involved in performance work that touches on digital art, that touches on kinetic sculpture. The work of Billy Kluver is connected to Rauschenberg's soundscapes. He was involved with the creation of some of the earliest moving sculptures. And this is rather Jean Tanguy's homage to New York, which destroyed itself, right? That's what we have left of it. It blew itself up on the steps of the MoMA. They had to bring the fire department to put it out, right? This is art that absolutely changed the world. And my favorite, at least from a conceptual point of view, Diebenkorn, toward the end of his life, after he started doing all these international projects with the Rauschenberg Overseas Collective Initiative, ROCI, R-O-C-I, he started making art for everyday people in public, in places where you didn't have to be a multi-billionaire to see it. And he created what he called the quarter-mile piece. That's meant to be one piece of art. Every bit of it is sort of conceptually connected. It takes an entire museum to show all of it. It is made of all kinds of different elements. Some of it is glass, some of it's plexiglass. There's screen printing on plexiglass panels that have mirrors behind them. So when you walk up to it, you're in the art yourself. They're just astonishing things. How do we get there? Well, very quickly, I wanted to hit on the ideas that lead us into these extremes of abstraction because they matter. This is the Bauhaus, the German art architecture design school that is sort of the prototype for what Black Mountain College was in America, in Asheville, our school. This, and we don't use the paper form anymore, we do it online, but that's the Cape Fear curriculum. And the design element there is boxes, right? Check them off, check them off, check them off. My favorite part is that box right there is for real history, and then down, oh, no, wait, I take it back. That's the real history box. That's where art history goes. Because I'm not talking about historical events. It's crazy when you think about it. We tend to think of our education as disjointed component parts that somehow we're supposed to put together magically and become whole human beings. Look at the Bauhaus curriculum. It's a holistic circle where everything relates to everything. All of it is combined in the preliminary course. All of that design idea is about whether you're going to be an architect or you're going to be a fashion designer. You need to know color theory. Notice it's not a painting class. It's a color class. That's the point of painting. It's a brilliant way of thinking, and that's Albers' brainchild. So we have Joseph Albers' prints in there. Albers taught Rauschenberg. Clement Greenberg taught at Black Mountain for a while, and Frankenthaler went there. The people who changed art as we know it were in this state, doing it, and we sometimes ignore that. Abstraction doesn't just come out of nothing. This is early 20th century in Germany. Can you see the buildings and the mountain and the sun? And here it's a little harder, but there's kind of a mountain and maybe some buildings. This is the work of the Der Blaue Reiter group, the Blue Rider in Germany. And very famously, they said that their ultimate goal was to give expression to your inner impulses. And Kandinsky said, pure abstraction is the only possible response to the confusion of the world. They were facing a world war that very quickly turned into a stock market crash and turned into another world war. And that is an intriguing concept because the images that he created look a lot like the symbols on this chart. And you notice I've put in cave art examples for you to see. There's a theory in anthropology, in art history, in a lot of different disciplines that we have what are known as entoptic images, kind of DNA in our brain. They're the images you see when you're not getting a visual stimulus. So like if you've ever closed your eye and pressed your eyelid, you see like a flash. They tend to actually make pretty common shapes, dots, concentric circles, nested lines, zigzags, and then something that looks kind of like the inside of your iris. Veiny thing, right? Which is perfect for making antlers. These images, and here you can see almost every one of those things on that chart. This is a cave in France. Our pre-lingual, pre-society ancestors knew this language and tell me that those aren't the same shapes. So abstraction isn't just getting high and doing whatever. It's a language that we share with the ancestors that has nothing to do with time, has nothing to do with language or culture or the color of your skin or who you love or anything, right? It's a universal human language. The abstract expressionists saw it. This is de Kooning's ex-wife, painting things that look like cave paintings. They knew that language was there. You can make abstraction and movement out of repetition, like the futurists. You can make it out of music. The synchronists in America believed that color and art and painting should be experienced the way we experience music, in time. We had Slow Art Day this past weekend. Did you know that the average person looks at a piece of art for 8 seconds max before moving on to the next thing? Go on a gallery tour with me at some point and watch me get mad at people going, These were meant to be experienced the way you experience a song. A good pop song takes 3.5 minutes to get to the point, right? It's a journey. And that's what these are meant to do with color. How about coding language to speak when you can't speak openly? This is the work of Marcin Hartley, who said of his work, I can hardly bear the sound of the words expressionism, emotionalism, personality, and such because they imply the wish to express personal life I prefer to have no personal life. He was gay in the First World War. His lover, Karl von Freiberg, was 24 years old when he died on the battlefield. He was in the 4th Regiment of the German military. Suddenly the whole story is right there, and they look like a second ago, those stupid geometric shapes. But they have a meaning. My kid could do that. I used to get this all the time. My kid could do that. Kids don't draw like that, number one. But look at what Mondrian could do. A man who can draw a chrysanthemum that accurately is making a decision to do this. And it comes from work. Look at the process of going from more grid, less detail. You can totally see him developing ideas if you look at not just the famous one in the book, but the ones that led up to it. Oh, art is stupid. People don't have holes in their tummies. This is Henry Moore, who's a genius, but his work was heavily influenced by being, oh, did that slide disappear? It did. Oh, it deleted the image I wanted to show you. He did drawings of his friends and neighbors in the subway tunnels during the Blitzkrieg. And they're all curves under blankets that look just like those curves. These look like traditional art that you should like. But if you blur it a little bit, it starts to look like kind of abstract pattern. We know that Arship Gorky had these posters of these works in his studio, along with this, which if you mess with it, gives you a color texture pattern pretty quickly. He could do it right. This is images of his mother who died when he was very, very young. This piece on the left is called Apron Strings. That's about her too. It's a choice. Abstraction is a language and a decision. Sometimes what is simple is hard to arrive at. That looks like anybody could just slap some black lines. But the way that he got to this, Franz Klein was painting with a sumi brush these cheesy drawings of chairs. That's a rocking chair. And his friend said, the only thing interesting about your drawing is the lines. So they gave him a projector and asked him to take a small bit and blow it up big. And then suddenly he's a superstar. It's a simple enough idea. That's one of my favorite paintings in some respects. It's sunflowers. It's not yellow. But aren't sunflowers exciting, beautiful, bursts like fireworks? Don't they make you happy? That painting makes me so happy. The artist who did this is known for walking through nature and not drawing, and then going back to the studio and making a response. And that's what is across the hall for all of us. I want to leave you with this last image. This is a piece by Jackson Pollock, who was a huge influence, of course, on especially Frankenthaler, but most of the people across the hall. This piece is called Full Fathom 5, and it references a specific scene in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Sorry, kids, yes, you do have to read every now and then. The Tempest is a story about madness in a storm. Essentially, that's what the core of it is all about, and it has some of the most terrifying language. Full fathom 5, thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell, ding dong. Hark, now I hear them, ding dong bell. It's an incantation. It's terrifying. It sounds like a witch. That painting is scary. A lot of us like our art more like the one on the right. The colors are in the right place. The sky is blue, the grass is green. The kids have the right number of eyes, and they're in the right place on their heads. But who is that? Stalin is one of the most terrifying historical creatures I could possibly show you. And look at this little child. He's so happy to meet Stalin. Oh, he's looking up at him like it's his grandpa, and he's got like candy and money to hand him. That's obviously a bit of propaganda, but you have to think that just because it looks like the real world isn't the only goal for every artist who's ever lived, right? I firmly believe that you are more than welcome to go into Game Changers and go, I don't like these weird geometric stupid things. That's okay, I'll live. I mean, you're wrong, but I'll live. My point, though, is that you live in a culture where you have the choice. You have the option to think for yourself and to think in a creative way. And if you want it super realistic, hey man, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But if you want it to come from your soul in a different way, maybe you'll have stuff in here in a few years. Thanks for your time. We're supposed to do Q&A if anybody has any Q. If I have any A's left, I will try to A the Q's. Anybody have a question?
Okay, so if that's a Jackson Pollock painting,
What is it, is the question.
Is it?
Yeah.
Or is it anything?
Whatever you think.
Other than it's an abstract painting.
I would call it non-objective abstraction. I would say it's not meant to be about a particular subject that we can all absolutely agree upon the way the painting on the right is. We can tell who it is, what is going on, we're supposed to know that. This is going into territory that is challenging and confusing because it doesn't tell us what we're supposed to think. And I think one of the best things about it is that your interpretation of it can be completely different from September's or mine or anyone else's. He is interested in showing movement. Primarily, that's all that his work really boils down to. And the best way to view it is to take a look at one color and follow its movement through, and then pick another one. And then you're having the experience that he had making it, and that's all it is. It's not trying to over-intellectualize itself into a way that makes you only certain people can get it from the secret symbols. It's really not. As much as it's off-putting for a lot of us, it's actually his desperate attempt to let you in on the process. Isn't that crazy? It really is about the making of the thing more than it is about the subject. You're welcome. Great question. Anybody else?
So my question is about the female artist that did all the prints and combined different techniques. So we talked a lot about mixed media today, and I'm a fan, but I feel like she did mixed techniques, and I've never really heard about that before. So can you talk about I don't know, maybe where she learned that from, or was she self-taught?
She's working with professional printmakers in printing presses like ULAE or GEL Gemini or Crown Point Press. So there are trained printmakers who know how to do the techniques. And it's a weird gray area because in the past we did use prints merely to make reproductions. So there was a period where printmakers were not really thought of as artists because they were kind of making repros of somebody else's stuff. So as we got into the 20th century in this country, the training for printmaking was really disappearing out of our, especially higher ed. And it was getting popular with people in underground kind of ways. All of the protest movements that have ever happened in this country rediscovered silkscreen and woodcut. And they were like, whoa, I can make this fast and it can mean something. Holy cow, right? They're excited. The trick is when you're established as a painter, which was her main area of expertise, and she went to school, she was trained, and then she was in this heady 1950s world around Pollock learning these new things. She didn't know printmaking until she went into the studios and said, I have this idea to make an image, we're gonna make a print on paper that looks like a brushstroke. And those ideas then developed with the printmaker having to be a problem solver. Well, how can I facilitate that, right? So as she grows as an artist, of course she's learning, and all of them get more and more adept at it. By the end of his career, Rauschenberg is doing his own litho without anybody helping him do anything, But it's an odd place where an artist is coming at it with the goal of make an image, not with well, this is a limitation, this thing can't do that, this thing can't do that. You've been in printmaking long enough to know that some things you can't really accomplish with lino that you can do with a dry point, right? A certain level of texture or detail is harder with one or the other. What she's saying is, I don't care, I want to make this thing, how are we going to do it? And then the trained printmaker is saying, well, we could try this kind of acid technique, right? And they're working in a really collaborative, creative, communal way. You're welcome. I could go all night, and I know you're tired and everybody wants to leave. Anybody have anything else at all? Go get it.
Really well done.